The energy sector contributes to nearly 3/4 of global greenhouse gas emissions. To mitigate climate change, the goal of the green transition is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through the use of renewable and less carbon-intensive energy sources.
Several countries in the European Union rely on gas for energy production, heating and cooking. Although gas-based energy production is not as carbon-intensive as oil and coal-based, it remains a potent source of methane, a greenhouse gas that causes global warming. Historically, Russia has been the main source of gas for the European Union. With the start of the war in Ukraine, the European Union has had to look for sources of gas elsewhere. One of these places has now become the United States of America. The US' own ambition to become energy independent from the Middle East has led the US to develop a vast infrastructure of pipelines and energy extraction all over the country. This existing infrastructure of pipeline is what has allowed the European Union to import gas after the war in Ukraine started 2 years ago. The US has been able to become energy independent and build a network of pipelines across the country thanks to the development of a gas extraction technique called hydraulic fracturing.
Hydraulic fracturing consists of drilling a long vertical well up to 2,500 to 3,000 meters, where the process of horizontal drilling takes place for about 1.5 kilometers through a compressed black layer called a shale rock formation. Fracking fluid is pumped down into the well at a pressure so high that it cracks the shale rock, creating fractures through which the trapped gas and oil can escape. The fluid itself is more than 90% water. The rest is made up of concentrated chemical additives. It's estimated that for one well, an average of 5 to 9 Olympic-sized pools of water are used. Along with the trapped gas, millions of liters of flowback liquid containing contaminants like radioactive material salts, heavy metals and hydrocarbons come back to the surface.
As a researcher, I have focused on how the green transition and the push towards less carbon-intensive energy production affect local communities. I have prioritized the voice and situated knowledge of those living close to hydraulic fracturing infrastructure and pipeline construction.
Hello, my name is Randy and I live in Harrison County, Ohio. Behind me you can see the forest, and it's a beautiful area here, and this is why we built our log home here. But unfortunately, about 5 years ago, the fracking industry decided that Ohio was a good place to locate, and they started fracking everywhere in the forest around our home. Now there are pipelines along all the hillsides and up over the hills. We can see compressor stations. We see brine trucks constantly on the highway. There are trucks that carry sand and chemicals. There are trucks that carry water. So what happens when they frack your community? They frack your life basically, because there's no place that we can go now that we aren't constantly reminded of our contribution to climate change. And if this wasn't bad enough, we haven't even discussed all the health issues that are associated with fracking. People know that it contaminates groundwater, it contaminates surface water, it also causes air emissions, they're fugitive emissions. It affects ecosystems because at night they flare off a lot of the waste gas, and in the sky at night we see pink instead of the stars. And often in the mornings we hear them blowing out compressor stations. It sounds like an airplane taking off at an airport. So what they've done basically is taken a rural area in the southeast portion of Ohio and they've made it into an industrial zone. And this is what fracking's all about.
Together with other researchers, I have conducted between 2017 and 2020 more than 100 interviews with residents of West Virginia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania living in the proximities of hydraulic fracturing extraction sites and pipeline construction. My studies recount the lived experience and knowledge of those living at the front line of gas extraction. A prevailing message was the feeling of not having been heard, neither by authorities nor gas companies, before being interviewed by my colleagues and I. The implications of living near a gas extraction site and the consequences it has on people's livelihoods and well-being have not been considered in the process of decision-making around the green transition. In this case, where to extract gas and where to construct pipelines. Bringing forth impacted communities' lived experience through peer-reviewed publication and qualitative methods has made emerge their situated knowledge in a way that was not only valuable for participants themselves, but also for environmental organizations working towards a just green transition. In my research, I have worked with the Ohio River Valley Institute and the Environmental Defense Fund.
I've had the honor to work with Dr. Caretta in her capacity as an advisory council member to our organization, as well as through the implementation of her research on the ground here in Appalachia. In our region, much of the private, academic, and even sometimes government-sponsored research is funded by the very industries that are the subject of these analyses, the oil and gas industry especially. For this reason, it can be difficult to find credible, neutral scientific research to support the work of grassroots organizations or community members impacted by fossil fuel industry activities. Residents and decision makers often do not have enough information to adequately assess the risk of oil and gas or other fossil fuel-based development. So being able to base our work on scientific evidence we can actually rely on is critical to the success of our work and the well-being of our communities.
Today, communities that are most harmed by energy regulatory decisions are often left out of those forums. A few years ago, I began focusing on procedural justice in public utility regulation. A colleague at EDF told me about Dr. Caretta's research, and her work was a light bulb moment for me. It helped to crystallize for me the way in which public utilities and their regulators rely on epistemic authorities, and the way in which that process discounts lived experience as a legitimate form of expertise.
How have the organizations used Dr. Caretta's work?
Because scientific evidence that substantiates the lived experience of impacted communities is so powerful, we are able to leverage this research in our conversations with decision makers, and they in turn are able to use this evidence to back up their policy priorities. One key example of this is a recent effort in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, the county that includes the city of Pittsburgh. Last year, the Allegheny County Council voted to ban fracking in county parks, but the county executive vetoed that vote, forcing the community to organize an effort to secure a veto override from county council and restore the ban on fracking in county parks. Residents of the county succeeded in convincing council to override the county executive's decision, and the ban on fracking in county parks was restored. They did this using evidence that supported their position, and evidence like the research produced by Dr. Caretta to make their case. Without this critical scientific evidence to back up the political pressure, it would have been difficult for some members of council to take that vote, if not impossible.
If the people making the decisions about the inputs and assumptions aren't the people closest to the place or the problem, then an incredibly important perspective, arguably the most important perspective, won't be considered. Dr. Caretta's research helped to catalyze my drive to include lived experiences in the records of Public Utility Commission decisions. So I started the Community Voices in Energy project, which aims to address the historic exclusion of frontline, BIPOC, and low-income communities from the regulatory and legal decision-making spaces that directly impact their quality of life. First, I piloted a version of this in late 2021 when I worked with a community leader in the historically Black farming community of Pembroke, Illinois. The gas company had successfully lobbied for legislation that let them build a new pipeline through that community and across farmland that had been protected by generations of environmental stewards. A few months later, we built on that model and worked with several community members to include their perspectives in Illinois Commerce Commission cases where the commission was deciding the metrics by which the utility's performance on certain categories would be measured. This time, I worked with 4 community leaders as well as a technical expert who provided data that demonstrated the widespread nature of the disparities the community experts described. We had some success in that case. The combination of lived experience with technical backup resulted in a commission decision that directed the utility to address their disparities in service. Participation as an intervener or witness is just one means of influencing a Public Utility Commission case, but it is the only method for introducing record evidence on which decision makers can formally rely.
Carrying out this research in Appalachia has been a truly humbling experience. I have worked with people living at the front line of drilling and pipeline construction, and I have understood that they are the true expert, not us scholars. A human and feminist geographic approach was fundamental to understand the importance of lived experience and to capture those in academic publications that inform the work of the Ohio River Valley Institute and the Environmental Defense Fund.
It's important to have research that focuses on the specificities of how Appalachia is affected by energy development, so we can make better and more informed decisions about the kind of future development that will truly serve our region. This work has helped so many people and organizations, and we're deeply grateful to the contributions of Dr. Caretta.
The lived experiences that my research magnified are fundamental in the current drive to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. While a green transition is something that society must take on, we should not forget that this societal change can also bring about fallouts for already marginalized communities. And it is our duty as scholars to bring forth the stories of these people to inform policymakers to lessen the burden on already marginalized communities.